Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Shaw, the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute. Thank you for joining another edition of our series, Understanding Our New World. And today we're fortunate to be joined by one of the wise men in American politics and diplomacy, former Senator John Danforth. Senator Danforth is a native of St. Louis, as you probably know. He went undergrad to Princeton, where he studied religious studies. He went then to Yale, where he got a degree in both divinity and law. He's an Episcopal priest, practiced law for a bit. Then he ran for and won the position of Attorney General in Missouri, where he served for 2 terms, was a 3-term United States Senator, and has been a special envoy to Sudan, and also has served as a U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Senator Danforth has written several books on politics and religion, which are really wonderful, and is also the founder of the Danforth Center for Politics and Religion, which we will talk about as well. So, Senator, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, John. Good to be with you.
Great. Well, Senator, maybe I should say you're well known at this institute. There's a picture of you on one of our walls because you're one of our first visitors in, I think it was May of '97. Senator Simon had invited a small group of senators to talk about Social Security. I don't know if you remember that. It was Senator Pryor, yourself, Senator Simpson. And so I don't know if you remember that particular event. That was more than 20 years ago. But tell us also about Paul Simon and your relationship with Paul and how you knew each other.
You know, I was never on a committee with Paul Simon, but he was just such a good person. That's my memory of him, of seeing him a lot. I would see him frequently at Lambert Airport, and there he would be usually talking on the phone, but he had this very nice, warm, I'd say happy manner about him. And he was a delight to be around.
And I mean, just, coming from adjoining states, were there some regional issues that you shared or just, I mean, obviously kind of those shared references between the greater St. Louis area and Metro East and Carbondale?
Well, it was good. I mean, we had a very good relationship. I would say sort of on the legislative front, because we weren't on the same committees, we didn't interact so much in the normal work of a U.S. Senate committee, that kind of a thing. So my main, what sticks in my mind about Paul is his manner, the kind of person he was, and the decency and the warmth of the person. He always seemed happy to see you. And that's pretty good, particularly in today's politics.
Well, yeah, I would say so. Well, Senator, I've heard you tell the story about your kind of foray into politics. And the story I heard is that I think you're 10 or 11 and your dad took you guys to Washington, and through twists and turns and having seen the various memorials, you and your dad, and maybe, I don't know if your brothers were with you, were in the Senate gallery watching a Senate debate. And I think your reaction to it was a little different than your father's.
That's right. Well, it was my parents and my brother Don and I were all together in the Senate gallery. And I had never had any particular interest about politics or government. And I remember sitting in the gallery and looking down, seeing Margaret Chase Smith. She's the one senator I remember. And then we were there for, I don't know, half an hour or so. And then as we were leaving the Senate gallery, I thought, that's what I want to do sometime. I mean, that is what I want to do. This is great. This would be so much fun, and to be in the U.S. Senate. That's what I wanted at age 10 or 11. And I remember verbatim what my dad said as we were leaving the Senate gallery, which was, "What a bunch of windbags." That was, that was just sort of a Midwestern reaction to what he was hearing on the floor of the Senate. Probably it would be even more so today, but that was his thought. And obviously when he said it, he had absolutely no idea of my interest. Now, once I developed an interest in politics, he was always positive and affirming of that. But his personal reaction to what he heard in the Senate was, what a bunch of windbags.
Well, then when you went to Princeton and you studied religion, and then from there you went to Yale, went to divinity school. What was, I mean, at that point, were you seeing religion and politics connected, or were these just sort of two different interests?
No, I really didn't. It was, when I was, as I say, from the time that I was in the Senate gallery through at least part of my time in college, my plan was to go to law school and be a lawyer, and also to see how that connected to being in politics. So that was the plan. But I majored in religion at Princeton and wrote a thesis on Reinhold Niebuhr, and became increasingly interested in religion. And I thought, and I think mistakenly, but I thought, gee, I mean, if I don't have a call, maybe I at least should explore this. So I kind of changed life plans and went to Yale Divinity School, thinking that I would end up either in the parish ministry or teaching religion, maybe in a college. And during my first year, I didn't have to be there very long before I thought, no, that was just the wrong path. Either one of those would have been the wrong path for me. So I changed plans again and reverted to my original plan to go to law school, and applied to Yale Law School, and they accepted me there. And then the question was, well, now that at that time I had 2 years of divinity school under my belt of a 3-year program, could I continue getting my degree from Yale Divinity School while working for my degree at Yale Law School? And I approached the dean of the, at the Divinity School, a man named Liston Pope, and asked him, and he said, you know, we have a rule against that. We have a rule that you can spread 1 year at divinity school over 2 years, but you can't do it over 3 years, which is what I wanted to do. He said, let me think about this. And about a week later, he called me into his office and he said, this is really interesting. This is intriguing, to be both a lawyer and a minister. It's like being a striptease saint. And so he let me continue to do that. And so I did finish both. Actually, I finished both degrees on the same day. And 2 days later, my wife, Sally, gave birth to our second daughter. So it was a very eventful time for us.
And then you moved to New York and were a practicing attorney there. And then I guess it was in 1968, you came back to Missouri and ran for Attorney General.
Well, I graduated from law school and divinity school in 1963. Went to the Davis Polk law firm in New York City for 3 years, was a tax lawyer at that time, if you can believe it. Then decided to return to St. Louis. I really did not want to be a New Yorker. So came back home, and I was at the Bryan Cave law firm in St. Louis for a couple of years, then ran for state attorney general as a real outsider. I mean, at that time, I'm a Republican. At that time, Republicans in our state were very, it was very unpromising. We never got elected statewide, but I managed to get elected attorney general. And then we thought, my wife sort of, well, gee, you've wrecked our lives. You know, you're going to be a politician. I thought you were going to be a lawyer. And I said, look, here's what we'll do. We'll finish out this time and go to Jefferson City, and finish out this time as Attorney General, and then that'll be the end of it. It'll be 4 years and we'll be out, and that's it. We can survive that. 26 years later, I finally retired from politics. So I think she doubted whether she could take my word on any life plan issue.
Well, let's talk about your Senate tenure, because you were there, from 76 to 95, and it coincides with a time that we think of as really a good time in the Senate. We had a speaker a couple of years ago, Ira Shapiro, who came to the campus and had written a book, The Last Great Senate, and he, I think his time frame was sort of 62 to 80 that he thought, but this was, you entered a Senate that was widely seen as a functioning body that, the parties were diverse in terms of, both parties had moderate, liberal, conservative wings. People, tell us about that time.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, there was a lot of overlap in the Senate at that time. And, there was certainly the center of gravity in the Republican Party was to the right of what it was in the Democratic Party, no doubt about that. But there was a lot of overlap. And I spent a lot of time on the Senate Finance Committee, which was, among other things, the tax writing committee. Very, very busy, very interesting work with great members. But the kind of Democrats who were on that committee included, Russell Long, who was this great chairman of the committee, and Lloyd Benson and Pat Moynihan on their side. And we had Bob Dole and Bob Packwood and John Chafee on our side. And everything that we did in the Finance Committee was done on a bipartisan basis, everything. If you wanted to have an amendment to a tax bill, you should have, for me, a Democratic co-sponsor. If you had, say, 3 Republicans, you should try to have 3 Democrats. The idea was to stay balanced on that committee. And then we worked through the committee system, the so-called regular order, and maybe we could talk about that in a minute. But it was working through a structure where everybody had a say. And that was really good. Even when I first went to the Finance Committee, and there are only, I think, 38, 39 Republicans in the Senate, which is insignificant, but still there was this camaraderie and effort to work together. The second thing was that we had a social life. We knew each other's spouses, we knew each other's children, we were in each other's homes, and we genuinely liked each other. So for us, our social friends in the Senate were as likely to be Democrats as Republicans. And we lived in Washington. Nowadays, people really don't. They go back home, or some of them sleep in their offices. But in those days, you knew each other as human beings, not just as political allies or opponents.
Well, it's sort of the personification of this Senate is your friendship with Tom Eagleton, which I've read about. And, Eagleton and you probably disagreed on almost every policy issue or many policy issues. But tell us about the friendship you developed.
Well, he preceded me in the Senate. He was there, I think, 6, 8 years ahead of me. So he was in the Senate, and I was elected to the Senate in 1976. And we had a family dinner party the night that I was first sworn in as a U.S. Senator. My family came to Washington for this, and so we had a room in a hotel where we had a dinner, basically just family and very, very close friends. And we invited Tom and Barbara Eagleton to that dinner. And during a sort of a quiet period, there weren't any speeches, but during sort of a quiet period of that dinner, Tom Eagleton turned to me and he said, "I know you wish your father were alive." And it was such a human touch to say that. His own father had died before he went to the Senate. And for him to say that, it established by his initiative, it established a kind of personal relationship between us. And so we always were friends, and our offices worked together. In fact, we had a combined softball team, Eagleton and Danforth. We called it the Missouri Compromise. So it was just a great, great relationship. And then a couple of years ago, I wrote an opinion piece in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch about my relationship with Eagleton, and I said, let's do something. Let's form, we'll call it a club. We'll have a club. We won't have any meetings or any dues, but we'll just constitute ourselves into a club. And the only thing with the club is treating your political opponents as friends. That's all we're going to do. And if you would like to be a member of this club, let me know. Just call me up, send me an email, say, "Dear Jack, I'm an Eagleton." That's all you have to say. So the next day, my phone rings in my office, and this woman's voice said, "Hi, Jack, I'm an Eagleton," and it was Barbara Eagleton. But it was an example. Same is true with Paul Simon. I mean, I wasn't as connected with Paul as I was with my own colleague in the Senate, but it was the same sort of interpersonal relationship, which really is a big deal, and it's a big deal in the Senate, and it's a big deal in our country right now. It is really big. We have to learn to treat people as friends, even when we strongly disagree with them. We can't have this kind of fracturing that we see now, and I mean that we see certainly politically, and then we see it with people who disagree with each other, even families broken up over politics. You can't have that. You can't have the country functioning that way. It's just contrary to what we should be. And so I really learned that. I learned the importance of it. And my great teacher right from the start was Eagleton.
And you would, as you tell the story, you would sometimes when you were home, you would go to Cardinal games together. And I guess he had a favorite restaurant in St. Louis that you would go to. And
yeah,
it was just...
he was deaf. He was extremely hard of hearing. And so you had to shout. So we would go to lunch, he would shout. Or I would go to his law office. He was at the Thompson Coburn firm. I was at Bryan Cave at the time. I would go by to visit with him or this or that. Maybe something that I really wanted, sort of private advice on how to handle something. And he'd have his door open and he'd be shouting. But it was kind of funny. But yeah, we went to ball games, and my wife Sally and Barbara Eagleton were close, and we knew each other's children, and we were in each other's homes, and it was just terrific. That he was a Democrat, I a Republican. He was politically certainly more progressive than I, but it was just a terrific relationship.
Well, you have said, and you've written a lot about what the Republican Party was like back then. And you said that, it had a pretty core and coherent agenda of, strongly believing in limited government and low taxes and relatively low regulation and free trade and strong defense. Mm-hmm. In fact, at one point you were writing and you said, as a senator, I worried every day about the size of the federal deficit. I did not spend a single minute worrying about the effects of gays on the institution of marriage. Today, it seems the other way around.
Yeah.
How did the party shift? Why did it shift from just that kind of core that maybe goes back to Eisenhower and further? How has it moved from that point?
I don't know. It got very closely connected with what you could call the Christian right. And it got very into social value questions, and particularly wedge type issues. And it became the way to, I think the theory was the way to energize the base of the party was to get into these very volatile wedge issues that tend to divide people. And that became a strategy for the Republican Party.
I know one of the things that you write about a lot is just the need to what you call reconstitute the center of the American political system. And you said, unfortunately, what's happened is both parties are now playing to their bases rather than reconstituting the center, which is where you at least believe most Americans are.
Right. No, I think that that's correct. I think that the center is gone now, the way politics is done, but I don't think it's gone as far as the American people are concerned. And I think that we and I'd say this is particularly true, I think, on the left, tend to get in the faces of other people and assume the worst possible motives and just assume that people are bad or that they're just ugly. And so, and sort of from a religious standpoint, it's called the prophetic mode. You know, I mean, the method of the prophets of Israel, which was confronting people, particularly political people. So we become really confrontational with each other. With that confrontation comes an intolerance and an unwillingness to listen and an unwillingness to understand, and hence more and more of the fracturing of the country. So I believe that the number one, I think it's number one, or it's certainly right up there, sort of purpose of America is very simple. It's simply to hold us together, to hold us together, to hold together all of these people who don't agree with each other. And not just to write them off as bad people, but to hold them together and to listen and to respect other people. And that this is the way our political system was set up, by the way, to make it possible to incorporate into one political system a variety of different interests. Now, when the Constitution was written, we had under 4 million people who lived here. Now we have 330 million people. So the divisive points are at different places, but there are a lot of reasons to be divided now. How do we hold ourselves together? And I think that part of that's a matter of tone, how we go about politics, how we speak politically. And I think part of it has to do with what's happened to our structure, and particularly what's happened to Congress, and most particularly what's happened to the US Senate, which was a place where all of these interests could come together and have their say. And now what was called the regular order just doesn't exist. So now this is my position, that's your position. The effect is that, really, what you learn in school, how does a bill become a law? Well, today it doesn't. It just doesn't. We've had no appropriations bills except continuing resolutions. So Congress, Article 1 of the Constitution is broken down. The Senate has broken down. The Senate is no longer a place that functions. And this has had major consequences in removing from our political structure the place where we used to be able to come to work things out.
I was, for another project, looking at some remarks that Senator Lugar, your close colleague of many years, made. And he was actually speaking to a group in Illinois, the Edgar Fellows. And I want to read a couple sentences and just kind of get your reaction. He was talking to this group and he says, "The best leaders unite us. They avoid succumbing to the temptation to rely exclusively on party talking points, and they are open to the possibility that someone from the other party may have a good idea. They recognize that there is inherent value in building consensus for policies beyond the 51% necessary to pass a bill. They understand that the benefits of purely partisan victories tend to be hard to sustain, while broadly supported initiatives usually have staying power." And I think of that, and then I think of something Senator McConnell said just a year or two ago when he said, "Winners make policy, losers go home." How did we get from the Lugar-Danforth model to winners make policy, losers go home?
I think that politicians want to get elected, and people in public office want to get reelected, and people who serve in Congress want to get reelected. And the biggest threat to a lot of them is not the general election, it's the primary. So in the primary campaign, they are threatened by opposition from the base of the party. And deviation from that base is viewed as a sin. So to be the ultra loyalist to your party, as opposed to somebody who compromises, compromise is viewed by the true believers in the two parties as really a dirty word. You shouldn't do it. You shouldn't reach out. You shouldn't even have friends in the other party. And that's the message that politicians are getting from the people who vote in their primaries.
I don't know if you saw this. Tom Friedman has an article in today's New York Times, and I want to read just one sentence and have you react to it. He said, "I can't say this more clearly. Our democracy is in terrible danger, more danger than it has been since the Civil War, more danger than after Pearl Harbor, more danger than during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and more danger than Watergate." And he was, I think, referring specifically to, the last night's debate and just the notion that the president may not accept the result of the elections. Does that strike you as hyperbolic? Or, how worried are you about just this center, this system holding together?
I'm on the Presidential Debate Commission, and we've taken a position not to weigh in one way or another in the presidential election. So I want to avoid doing that. But I am very concerned about fracturing. And I'm very concerned about fracturing politically. And I'm very concerned about fracturing otherwise, the us against them, the righteous calling out in college campuses and so on, calling people out, the cancel culture and all that. I'm very, very concerned about that. And I think that we have an obligation, and particularly people of faith, have an obligation to be, as St. Paul said, ambassadors of reconciliation. I think that's really our job. We should see that as our ministry to the country, to try to hold us together. And I also think, as I said earlier, that that's the political mission of America, and it's the reason for the structure. I'm talking not so much the Bill of Rights, but the reason for the structure of the Constitution is to provide a way of holding together all these diverse competing interests.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your time in diplomacy. You served as a special envoy to Sudan, trying to bring an end to just a horrible conflict there. You served for a time in the UN. Tell me about your experience in diplomacy, and particularly connecting it to some of these things you're talking about in terms of, the kind of the religious imperative to bring people together to reconcile.
Yeah, well, I mean, Sudan, you're right. President George W. Bush appointed me his special envoy for peace in Sudan. Now, this was 20 years ago, I guess. And that country was just, I mean, Sudan should have a lot going for it, particularly it's got oil reserves. But it was so divided ethnically that it was at war. I mean, the non-Arabs, mainly black, but I mean, they were black Sudanese, but some of the Arabs were also, but there was this division between, basically located in the south of Sudan, and then the Arabs. And the non-Arabs thought that they were being abused. It's kind of the same sort of thing. They thought that they were being abused. They thought they were being discriminated against, and they were. They were. And so here was this country that should have had potential, and it was just totally embroiled in warfare. And that was the challenge at that time. We were successful in negotiating a peace agreement that lasted 5 years, so it did some good. But Sudan at that time was just ruined by its divisions.
In terms of the challenge of diplomacy, I mean, you're obviously you came with a long career in the Senate and government. Are the sort of skill sets related? Are they different? Tell me about the challenge of being both a special envoy and an ambassador at the UN.
Yeah, well, there were different sorts of jobs, of course. The good thing about being the special envoy was that the people on both sides were very interested in the United States and the position of the United States. And they knew that I was George W. Bush's guy. They knew that he had appointed me. They knew that I had his ear. They knew, and I made it a point of telling them this every time I went over there. I would talk to President Bush in advance. And he was very, very interested in Sudan, and that helped a lot. He saw Sudan as a kind of a template. He thought that if Sudan, as he said to me one time, if they can work it out, anybody can. Meaning, what you could call the North-South division in Africa. If Sudan could work it out, it would have spillover effects for the rest of Africa. So it was really terrific, his personal interest, and that was that particular role. The UN job, I mean, I know I was only there 6 months, but I mean, it was just not for me. It was the only part of the UN that has any power is the Security Council. So there's 15 members. Then you've got these countries that have the veto, 6, I guess, have the veto power, 5 maybe, have the veto. And so by the time you try to put together any kind of resolution, you've got all these parties and you have to work it out, and it turns out to be just lowest common denominator is what you're doing. So it was, I don't know, it was not to me a satisfying job, except they have a rotating presidency. So for 1 month, while I was there, I got to be the president of the Security Council, and with the support of the administration, we took all of the Security Council over to Nairobi for the peace talks. We took all these 15 countries over there. And we passed a resolution, which was mush, but it was a resolution and basically saying to both sides, here's the rest of the world watching you, where's the peace? And, you know, I think a month later, there was a peace agreement. So that was kind of neat. But by and large, it was not, for me, a great job.
Well, I saw one interview where you said, I guess as this was ending, you said, it was always clear to me I was coming home. I mean, not every senator who moves to Washington comes home. An awful lot stay there. But for you, I know your family has deep ties to St. Louis. So tell us about returning home, and also tell us about starting the Danforth Center at WashU.
Yeah. Well, I was born in St. Louis. I grew up in St. Louis. It is my home. It's always been, I've always thought, I was always a Cardinals fan. I wasn't any Nationals fan or anything like that. I'm a St. Louis guy, and that's where I am. And it also applies, I have to say, to the whole state. You can't, for me, you can't spend 26 years representing the entire state without thinking, this is my place. And so it's really interesting, like when there was a terrible tornado 5 or 6 years ago in Joplin. Joplin is a 4.5 drive from my house, 4.5 hour drive from my house. But I mean, it hurt me. These are my people. That's how I felt, you know. There is this sense of relationship and belonging in place that was really important to me, and I was never, ever going to stay in Washington. 3 times in my life, Sally and I have moved from the East back to St. Louis, so there's kind of a pattern in all of that. The Danforth Center on Religion and Politics at Washington University is a center to study and have courses and have a minor and bring in speakers and have various kinds of public programs on the relationship between religion and American politics. That's what it's about. And what are the bones of contention? In what respect is religion a divisive force? In what respect is religion a positive force? How do religious faithful people exercise their religion in a constructive way? All of that, plus the academic study of all this. So it's serious academics, it's real scholarship. And we've had terrific speakers. We've had really some good speakers come in there. We've had for example, Cardinal Dolan, who is a St. Louisan, and we've had Bishop Curry, the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. We had my friend Michael Perry, who's now the international head of the Franciscans. He came in. We've had George Will, we've had David Brooks, we've had E.J. Dionne, we've had all of these people come in one way or another as part of our program. So there's a lot of community participation. There are a lot of people who are not Washington U people who come and participate in these meetings.
I was reading the transcript of the press conference, one of the press conferences in which you announced it. I think you announced it both in Washington and St. Louis. And one of them you said, the language of religion is different than the language of politics. What did you mean by that?
Well, I have to try to recollect what I meant by that. But yeah, I mean, it's clearly true. Religion, language of religion is creedal. You know, I believe these are my religious beliefs. The language of politics, when it works, is more tentative and more political, you know, I mean, just more compromising. It should be, it's not now. I mean, that's the problem. The problem in politics is really what you could call idolatry. It's turning politics into something that is represented as being religious or as being holy, and it isn't. It's simply politics. And it's a place where, people just disagree. Religion and politics do have a different way of speaking and should have a different way of speaking.
Senator, we have a few questions we'd like to pose that we've received from across Missouri and across really the country. Krista from St. Louis poses a simple question. What do you see as the biggest challenge to American democracy?
Well, as we've been talking about this before, I think it's holding the country together when it seems to be falling apart. I mean, everything, all of these issues, whatever, taxes, spending, healthcare, whatever, the COVID bill, all of this, that's all political. I mean, it's just sort of, it's there and you deal with it. And if you have the regular order working in the Congress, there are ways to work through those issues, which we're not using right now. So I think that's the big deal, just how to hold the country together structurally in making the political system work, but also in the way that all of us private citizens deal with each other and respect each other.
Nathan from Carbondale wonders that with the Supreme Court perhaps on the verge of having 6 Catholics among the 9 justices, if you're concerned that these Catholics will not be able to, that their religious views will sort of intrude upon and shape their judicial renderings.
No, I think it's unimaginable. I mean, the one that I know the best is the justice who worked for me, both in my Attorney General's office and in my Senate office, Clarence Thomas. I've known him for maybe 6 decades, but right? 5 decades, whatever it is. I mean, I know him very well, and he's a daily Mass Catholic. And it is absolutely inconceivable to me, knowing him as well as I do, that he would try to impose religious views. He has very definite, people can agree with him or not agree with them, jurisprudential views, but to think that somehow it's religion, and to think that this Judge Barrett or any of these people, Roberts, any of them, it's true. There are 5 Catholics now. There's 6. There's 6. There will be 6, assuming Judge Barrett is confirmed. But no, I think that's not something to worry about.
Bill from Chicago wants to know if you think our diplomatic corps has become, quote, wounded. And I guess maybe to speak more broadly about whether this difficult period has done damage to American diplomacy.
Well, the diplomatic corps, whether that's wounded, I would doubt that. I mean, I think that there's very, very able people in the diplomatic corps and very devoted people in it. So I would doubt that the diplomatic corps has been wounded. I think that the people are in place and that they're good people. So I don't know how to answer the other question without seeming to get into presidential politics, which is something, because I'm on the debate commission, I can't do.
Okay. Well, Mindy from Carbondale asks, what is your most hopeful scenario for America?
Oh, I'm hopeful. I really am. My hopeful scenario, I've got this thing that I'm really interested in. I had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago with a wonderful Jesuit named Matt Malone. He's the editor of American Magazine. And the idea is to use what we do in churches, in our Episcopal Church, and the Catholic Church, and I'm sure others, we exchange the peace. And that is that right at the beginning of what you could call the most sacred part of the liturgy, we turn to the people next to us, and we just extend our hands and we say, the peace of the Lord be always with you. Now, why shouldn't it be our ministry to carry that into the world? Now, we wouldn't go up to some stranger on the street and say the peace of the Lord, but we could say, I'm your friend. And why can't we have a real effort to treat opponents as friends? And that's where we are. And you know what? Here's the other thing. Why am I hopeful? I think that the overwhelming majority of people in our country are really good people. Really good people. I don't think that they're racists. I don't think that they're nasty. I think that they are just good souls and that they want to be good people. And if we particularly, I think, faithful people, try to evoke the goodness that I think is out there, there's a lot to work with.
Connie from Springfield asks, is there a political career that you particularly admire?
Yeah, Howard Baker.
Tell us about Senator Baker. What about him was so compelling?
Well, he was, I mean, there were a lot of people in the Senate that I thought were really good. I mean, a lot of them that I thought were really good. But Howard Baker was our Republican leader. He was a minority leader. He was the majority leader in the Senate. He had the smallest ego of anybody I've ever known in politics. I mean, the smallest. He had a sense of humor, which is a big deal. He sure had that. He had the ability to work with people and work things out. He certainly had a point of view. He wasn't, just pablum, but he understood how to listen to people. And he frequently said there's no way to get the Senate to move faster than it wants to move. And that sure is true. So I thought, as a person who understood politics and had a really good heart, Howard Baker was terrific.
Well, you might be interested. We published a book on statesmanship, and we profiled 12 people, and he was one of them, focusing particularly on his work on the Panama Canal and the way that he was willing to go across the aisle and work on an issue that hurt him politically.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Right. It's that was the hottest of all hot potatoes, and yeah, he sure was.
Well, Senator, final question. I mean, you've talked about your deep connection to St. Louis. So let me ask you this: if you were someone was visiting St. Louis for the first time on a glorious fall afternoon like this, where are some of the places you would take them to show them your city? Let's assume it's not a Cardinals World Series game, but where would you take them to show them the best of St. Louis?
Forest Park, for sure, that's terrific. I would go to the Missouri Botanical Garden. I would go to the Arch, which is, they've just really changed the Arch grounds in the museum. I would sure go there. I mean, those would be 3 for starters. And of all the various institutions at Forest Park, the zoo, the art museum, and so on, that are very, very good institutions. Please come, please stay. And if you got some money to spend, please spend it in St. Louis.
You're not on the Chamber of Commerce, are you, Senator? Well, thank you so much for your time, Senator. It was really great to hear from you. And as I say, you're enshrined in the Institute's Hall of Fame. We have photos of you here. And we'd love for you to visit again when travel allows and to see the Institute a quarter century after your first visit here.
Yeah, and don't let anybody draw a mustache on my picture.
Great. Thank you so much, Senator. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for joining another edition of our series, Understanding Our New World. We will have a video of this on our YouTube channel tomorrow. So please view that again and show it to your friends. And thank you for supporting the Institute and allowing us to keep the legacy of Paul Simon alive and well. Thanks so much.